Hello team. Today I want to provide you with another update on the state of our budget. Last time we spoke about the budget, we went over these two slides that showed us our current financial position. I'll review briefly this information again. So last year, we started the year with a planned $6 million deficit. Mid-year this year, the governor announced a 1% holdback, which equated to approximately $1 million that we sent back to the state. Also, last fall and this spring, our enrollment declined, and that caused us to have $3 million less in revenue than was budgeted. And finally, at the end of this fiscal year, the governor asked for another 1% holdback to help the state mitigate the immediate impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, we will also see approximately $3 million in expenses this fiscal year related to revenue lost and other direct expenses related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, that last $3 million are only one-time expenses and not part of our ongoing budget, but they do impact our financial condition. So going into next year, that sets us up with an over $11 million structural deficit in the budget, and the state has announced plans for another 5% holdback next fiscal year, which would put our total deficit at $16 million if we do nothing. And remember, this data was assuming flat enrollments. If enrollments change, our financial position changes with those enrollments. Since I first presented this information, each college and division submitted a budget proposal with 4%, 5%, and 6% reductions to address this deficit. On April 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, the university's Leadership Council, which includes academic and administrative leadership as well as representatives from the Faculty Senate, the Staff Council, and the associated students. They met and reviewed these proposals. Rather than making blanket cuts, the Leadership Council considered all proposals very carefully and approached decision-making as strategically as possible, knowing that this is a very difficult situation. The Leadership Council reviewed each budget proposal and made recommendations as to what level to reduce the budgets, and in some cases asking for alternative proposals. They also reviewed requests for strategic investments submitted by the units as part of the budget development process. Because even in times of significant deficits, we need to continue making progress towards our strategic goals and priorities to position us to better fulfill our mission. Which is time for an aside about our priorities of recruitment and retention of our students. Before the pandemic hit, our efforts were working. Our statewide brand image campaign, our increased student recruitment efforts, and our other efforts were seeing results. In March, before COVID hit, new student applications were up 15% and housing deposits were up 14%. Now, we all know that things have changed, and we are now in a fluid situation with college enrollment, but we must continue our efforts in this regard as investments in our future. As I have said, we hope to be fully operational in the fall, but based on public health guidelines, we will also be planning for the continuation of social distancing. We will have additional safety protocols in place. This may include making changes to how we do classroom scheduling and class enrollment caps. So related to enrollment in the fall, we have to be prepared with contingency plans for both operational and financial changes. So the Leadership Council had these strategies and our priorities in mind when they met and sent their recommendations to the Administrative Council for review and final decision. The Administrative Council met and spent 3 days of meetings to discuss and decide the final actions on the proposed reductions. So here's where we are today. Through the strategic reductions, we were able to cut $11.7 million from the budget over a 2-year period. I am sure many of you are very interested in the details of the reductions, so let's discuss that next. This slide shows the broad categories of where those cuts occurred. First, there was an effort to eliminate many vacant positions across campus. In addition, we also needed to make some reductions in positions that are currently filled. Temporary and irregular salary pools, which includes adjunct salaries, were also reduced. Approximately $3.6 million in ongoing operating expenses was removed from the budget, and we are anticipating $480,000 in revenue growth from the expansion of certain high-demand programs. In terms of our vacant position and employee reductions, this is how that breaks down across employee types at the university. As you can see, there will be cuts of 3.8% in the total budget for classified staff and 6.7% in our total professional staff budget, for a staff reduction total of almost $4.5 million. For the faculty, the percentage reductions were 3.3% of the total faculty personnel budget for a total of just under $2.3 million. And this is how the reductions break down across the colleges and divisions. Not all areas received the same reduction because we looked at each area to determine where reductions could be made without having significant impact to our students. So here are the percentage reductions for the academic units, and then for the Division of Health Sciences, and for the remainder of the university. In addition to the reductions, there were also a number of strategic investments requested by units. In other words, where could we make reallocations that the Leadership Council recommended for our future? Because I firmly believe that you cannot cut your way to success. Rather, we must make cuts as strategically as possible and then reallocate what resources we can to the areas of biggest impact, areas where we can position ourselves for the future. These were the initiatives that we chose to fund this year. These are mostly designed to improve student recruitment and retention, fulfill urgent workforce needs, and are intended to have a direct impact on increasing our revenue through student enrollment. So these investments will be built into the ongoing base budget going forward. You will notice that there are investments in new faculty lines and high-demand programs. These are important because they will generate an expected $1.2 million in new revenue for the university per year. And then there were these investments that were also recommended, and they were only funded on a one-time basis for next year, but not into the permanent budget. So after all of this, there still remains a deficit for fiscal year 21. To continue to alleviate this deficit, we are planning to do two additional measures. First, we will collect all salary savings that occur throughout the year into a single pool to reduce the deficit. This could help with an estimated $2.75 million of that deficit. Now, this is not our long-term plan. As I have said, we need to move towards a budget model with more mutual accountability, and that will mean one where units will have ownership of some of those savings in the future to help them plan for the future and be responsible for the budgets under their stewardship. But for this next fiscal year, to handle the remaining deficit, we will pool those savings to help balance the budget. Secondly, we feel it will be necessary to implement mandatory furloughs for the next fiscal year, which would yield a salary savings of approximately $2 million. We have also submitted a plan to the state to implement a voluntary furlough program that will be available starting this fiscal year and continuing through next year. More information on these efforts and the details of how that will work for everyone will be shared in the next week or two. So in summary, please note that this chart spans the next 2 fiscal years. That is because these reductions will be implemented over the next 2 fiscal years, and the strategic investments will be implemented over the next 2 fiscal years. So this will likely leave us with a potential deficit of $2 to $3 million in the first of those 2 years, while the final changes take effect the following year. We will use a combination of Federal CARES Act funds and university reserves to bridge that gap. So while this chart shows the deficit moving to 0, it will take 2 years for that to occur. So as of now, the salary savings pooling and the furloughs are only projected to be necessary in fiscal year 21. In addition, we still do not know 2 important factors that will impact our budget. We do not know what next year's enrollments will be, and we do not know if there will be more impacts to the state's budget that could lead to further budget reductions. So we will be prepared to respond as needed to changes in enrollment or to state budget reductions. Now, I understand this information is heavy, and there's no way around that. And I'm sorry we find ourselves in this situation. Many times, working through this process has left me with a feeling of sadness and dejection and despair. I was mourning the opportunities we will miss, for our colleagues who will lose their jobs, and the overall negative impact this will have on our community. And I know that many of you are feeling the same. And while I have felt these things, I also continue to be very proud. Proud of this university. We came together during trying times. We united in good faith, with positive intentions, and we reduced budgets and ended with results that, while difficult, will hopefully minimize the long-term detriment to the university and may, in fact, position us well to take advantage of every opportunity we can during our recovery. So I wanted to tell you that I have been sustained by a feeling of deep pride. I'm proud of all of you. I'm proud of us. Before I leave you, I'd like to share a bit of wisdom that comes to us from fiction. For any Tolkien fans out there, you will recognize these passages. Tolkien wrote from his experiences as a soldier in World War I and the dark times he lived through. Tolkien's character, Gandalf the Grey, said to his companions, who wished that they were not dealing with these dark times. And he said, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." And at another time, he said to his companions, he said that, "I have found that it is the small everyday deed of ordinary people that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love." So I will end by simply saying thank you. And that I am so incredibly honored to be serving this university alongside you, alongside all of you. So thank you, and we will talk again soon.